people who are good at violence are very good at veiling that telegraph so that so that you have no reason to know that it's going to happen, because they're playing on a very different game than you. And I'm not saying it's dishonorable or it's honorable. I'm not talking about honor versus dignity culture. I'm talking about purely the application of force. And so, but the people that I want to fight to actually do damage on, like, I'm not going to tell you, dude. I'm not going to get on Twitter and say, oh, fuck you, I'm going to kick your face in. It's like, you're just going to turn your car and it's going to light on fire. Like, I don't, that's not, that's how shit works. That's how shit works in like the world of violence, is that like the guy, and you see this in every arena of like, the ego and established dominance. It's like, yeah, you're very good at doing that. You will die. You're just straight to cannon fodder. Go ahead.
Yeah.
You're listening to the Art and More podcast with your hosts, Nathan and B.R. Nathan is a Canadian illustrator with a couple years of military experience, and B.R. is a British anarchist that moved to the States. Both are passionate shooters and community builders. Together, they run the Seaburn art page. Enjoy the show.
We were all thinking
Constantly indies into wool. Oh god, remember SHOT Show, and just like the amount of people who are almost definitely concealed carrying there. Totally not me. Never would do that. Like the idea of going around and setting a shot timer off to see how many people just instinctively reach for their holsters. Yes, hello everyone. Welcome back to the Art and War podcast. Today we are joined for the first kind of second time by our unofficial co-host that's not Isaac Botkin, Forrest of the Redacted LLC podcast.
What's up, Nathan? How's it going, BR?
How's it going, man? Happy to have you. It is like your unofficial second time on the show, because we had, if people remember a little while back, we had a week where we just missed the fucking ball. And
yes, I think it was driving across America.
Was it that week? It was something like that. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you kindly loaned us the episode you did with Nathan.
Yes, great episode. You felt very dumb during all of it. You are being in the presence of a smart cookie, if you will. Now you're on our show. We're going to drag you down to my fucking level.
Yes. Well, intellect is kind of like a division of labor, and considering that the Industrial Revolution had consequences, one of those is that I use big words and people think I'm smart, and then I go home and have an existential crisis about whatever the hell I'm doing with my life.
You just immediately slip back into imposter syndrome.
Yeah, imposter syndrome. It never goes away.
Yeah, it's a practiced habit at this point.
Dude, that has been the golden ticket. Like, people ask me why I moved to the States, and my bullshit answer is I moved here for gun rights, but that's a complete lie. I just moved here so I sound smart, because where I'm from, I'm like the town fool, but here no one knows that.
But hey, no one needs to know. No one's gonna know, man. No one needs to know.
How would they know? How would they
know? It's like all of our vernacular has descended into memes and like reels. It's great.
So. I feel like basically a caveman with access to the internet these days. It's a problem.
We need to make a podcast like 15 seconds long now.
I don't know. Well,
yeah.
Go ahead. Go you first.
Everyone's brain is so blown out on the TikTok and the reels.
Blown out.
Blown out. It's like, when you don't eat sugar for a little while and you have like, I don't know, like a berry or something with objectively not a lot of sugar, and it immediately overwhelms you. Yes. I feel like that's a lot of people's attention span.
Yeah, I've tried the keto thing a couple times. Like I've done like a keto to keto light style eating.
Yeah.
Never full keto, but I've definitely cut a lot of that. And then like eventually it's usually a couple of months or weeks down the road where I'm like, you know what, I'm done. I'm going to have a Coke. And then it is the best tasting Coca-Cola I've ever had. Even though it's still like American junk water Coca-Cola, but still it's just like, oh wow, I forgot how good these tasted.
Yeah. So. No, it's like sugar blows out your brain. My mind jumps to John Harvey Kellogg, and like when he started making sugary cereal, and I'm definitely going to get fact checked on this a ton. I'm probably basically making this up, but the source is me, and it came in a dream. People like what is the sweetest thing in the world right now that we can shove into the populace? It's grapes. And he started making things.
Yeah, grape nuts.
Yeah. Grapes are the sweetest thing, and then they just went to like more and more processed sugars, and then
Yeah.
artificially processed sugars, and well, it's redundant. Yeah,
Yeah.
the whole I don't know if I want to call it a conspiracy, because like the way that we talk about words like conspiracy and theory or conspiracy theory is so
Yeah.
convoluted at this time, it's almost meaningless chatter. It's almost it almost doesn't mean anything. Like there's other words that we use in common talk today that just really don't mean anything.
Yeah.
And they're like, like equality, liberty, freedom, or like that's racist, or you're like, none of this means anything more. You've robbed all of these words of meaning. But the whole issue about conspiracy theories, if you really want to get into the root of solving them, is like, okay, give me a name and an address. Who's responsible and when did they do it? And then it, if you can't produce that amount of information, then you're just at the fact, you're still in like the research phase, dude. If you really want to be a true conspiracy theorist, you have to give solid evidence. And that's certainly achievable. And the absence of evidence is not the evidence of it being true and hidden. It's like, okay, guy, like, I'm sorry that you think that the Sith are ruling the world. It's maybe are there words that we can't say on the show? I'm supposed to know.
No, very few. Like, there's like 3, and I've probably
Okay.
bleeped Nathan saying all of them.
Yeah. Well, like, it's like, oh, well, he comes from a different country. Okay, so we can give him.
He doesn't
grace.
understand how we speak here.
Oh, geez. I have the that kind of reminds me of Victim Henry. She would just say the most heinous shit with her liberal British art school friends, and she'd just go like, "Oh, I'm Eastern European. It's okay," and they just go like, "Oh, all right."
Okay.
Or same with Lucas. It's the privilege of being from a quote unknown culture unquote. In this case, Canadian.
Canada. Oh, Canada. Well, I'm from Minnesota, so I guess as the only natural born American. Yeah, as the only natural born American on this show currently, which is kind of grown up in which is somehow centered in gun culture. I guess I feel privileged, not in the bad way, more in the way like, I guess you two have to pay homage to me for being the one that held the line. But I was from.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, right. Like, isn't that what we're supposed to do? Like passive aggressive digs at each other. But the I don't live in Minnesota right now, but coming from Minnesota, people would always laugh at our accents, and we just blamed Canada because it was easier than trying to explain the history of the Swedish peoples and how they migrated to the Midwest. So there you go.
I mean, which is the better culture, like being Swedish or hating Canada?
What's the difference?
Why not both?
Why not both? Did you I don't know anything about Minnesota really. Like, is it like a more freedom leaning state, or is it like?
Do you want me to Vladimir Putin this one? Do you really want me to do like Tucker Carlson, Vladimir Putin back in
Yes,
back in the 1800s?
Yeah,
right. Back in the 1800s. So the history of Minnesota in an abbreviated format is the populations that tended to move to Minnesota that we attribute to a lot of the regional the sort of post nationalities that live there, like the Swedish, the German, the Dutch, the Polish. There's also a bit of not as much of like a big Irish, but whatever. You talk about these different kind of European countries and in the classic sense nations or peoples that moved to Minnesota. Most of them were preceded by the French fur trade and the French fur trade. So before America was even America, there was a pretty vibrant fur trade going on the northern region of Minnesota, which again, this is before the state and all that other kind of stuff, because there were things like access to the Mississippi, and the Native American tribes participated in a lot of hunting, and they knew the land and all this other kind of stuff. So there was like this it's depicted as mostly symbiotic between the French and the Indians at this time, not to be confused with the French and Indian War, or the French and the natives. But that was a long time earlier, and then of course the revolution happens, and Minnesota, I think, becomes a state right around the time of the first Civil War of America. And the populations that tended to move there's a lot of Swedish, Dutch, Norwegian, German, Polish families. This was like these kind of, you think about it. And my grandfather was like, my grandfather on my mother's side was 100% Swedish, and he talked about it. And I remember listening to him talk about it as very much so like families moved there, and then those families grabbed other family members that moved over, and more family members that moved over, and so you had this kind of expanding village that in one way still stands to this day in Minneapolis and the Twin Cities, because there's kind of the unofficial Swedish part of town and Polish part of town and German part of town. But then around the 1990s, in the 1990s, Minnesota became a very, what you could refer to as like a giveaway state. And they brought in a whole bunch of refugee populations en masse, and for better and for worse. But and some of them integrated better, and some of them integrated poorly. And the one that everyone thinks about is they think of the Somalis. And so there are more Somalis in Minnesota than anywhere else in the world except for Somalia. And while that brings in a certain list of problems, even the Somalian population in Minnesota is kind of divided, because some of them want to kind of leave the, let's call it, politics of Somalia behind. And then some of them are trying to drag that into, let's call it, the new world. So politically speaking, Minnesota is a mono-state. It is politically speaking, it is an argument between Stalin and Mao for who can be more left. And
Oh, sick.
But culturally speaking, if you're talking about like the politics of the state, it is actually quite diverse. It's you will have everything from card-carrying communists to as anarcho-libertarian as you can get, to a very strong kind of Republican base that mixes between old Republican and new Republican, if Donald Trump is the dividing line between those. And then you have a little bit of this like statesman's lead conservative, and then the Democratic influences in Minnesota range from kind of a blue dog Democrat, working man's Democrat, which is really not the, it's kind of the veil that the socialists hide behind now. And so 2020 was a very indicative year that the Democratic Party of your grandfather and your father's time is now just openly violent mob mentality, ruin and destroy, pillage and burn, take your property kind of people. And it's become evident in the way that the state level politics work. Is, like I said, while the population of Minneapolis or Minnesota ranges in political worldviews and generally gets along for better and for worse, the politician class of Minnesota is a race to who can make Gavin Newsom look like milk toast, and it's very depressing. But so the gun rights in Minnesota up until last year were pretty vanilla. Like everyone, there wasn't a list of prohibited items. You could get an SBR if you wanted to. You just had to do it just like everybody else had to. You could buy suppressors. There wasn't like arbitrary bans on random items. There were the hunting. There were some. I mean, that's not even politics, but like there's some debate over what hunting was acceptable. But being in the Midwest, there wasn't any public land because everything is privately owned except for small patches, and if they're hard to get to, it kind of creates a challenge. But so like as night vision became more popular, we're starting to see that open up into the different spaces, make that slightly more available. When I say we, I mean I still keep up with some people in Minnesota. But it was like a year ago where they started really pushing into red flag laws. They haven't accomplished a magazine ban, but there's certainly no shortage of attempts. An assault weapons ban is always an attempt, but it's kind of that like I'm going to submit the same bill every year, knowing that one year it'll eventually stick. But generally speaking, because there's a decent amount of a hunting population, as well as rises in crime and the general population being so politically diverse, it's really hard to make one stick unless as you would expect in somewhere like Massachusetts or California or Washington.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, it's not one of the Minnesota is not one of those states that you ever hear, alarm bells ringing for. Like people aren't like, "Hey, rally for Minnesota!" Like the gun control's coming. It's kind of slept on. Like you've got Illinois, California, New York, like all of the kind of your general ones that are seen as like, oh yeah, obviously they're gonna have bullshit laws, but Minnesota,
Yeah.
like this is literally like a Minnesota mentioned moment. I could not even point it out on the map. I'm sorry to say.
Most people didn't know where Minnesota was until George Floyd died. Like they had
Oh
no
fuck!
idea where. Like like I had lived in Georgia. I was in the military for a while, and like Minnesota was one of those states where like you could pick any northern state, and people would go, "Is this Minnesota? Is this Minnesota?" And like, no, that's Michigan. And they're like, "Okay, is this Minnesota?
What's
No,
the
that's
difference?
that's Montana. Oh, what's the difference between Minnesota and
No. I'm not trying to pick that fight.
yeah, so up until like the death of George Floyd, like no, it was not it was not like this state where someone goes, I know where that is. But then for a hot minute, we were super popular in the news. So
Like everyone's talking about us. Oh.
yeah, and what I mean by hot minute is like in one night, 159 buildings were lit on fire. Like that was a pretty hot minute. So it's I see the subtlety of the jokes they kind of layer in all the time. But
He's
yeah,
joking about the riots. There we go. I just
yeah.
had to cue in like the 25% of the audience. It's like,
Yeah, no, there's let's see here I'm gonna tell my age and make some negative confessions. Has anybody played World of Warcraft? Does anybody know what I'm talking about?
I have I know
I've
of it.
seen it.
I
Like
haven't.
Okay, so like
I'm yeah.
when I was a kid, one of the when I was a younger guy, I started playing World of Warcraft at one point in time, and there was let's see, what's it? The race was called the Blood Elves, and if everyone wants to boo me at this time, I played my first character that I played was a Blood Elf Paladin, and in the home country, the home part of the game where you start as, there's this thing referred to as the Scar, which is this like you've got all these beautiful forests with this just like dead zone in a line straight across the map. Yeah, that's Minneapolis right now. There's like a scar of where all the riots happened, and it's just an economic dead zone. That's a
I
straight
was gonna
line.
say, is it still all rubble and like ruin?
It's not rubble. It's that you've seen so many businesses move out and be replaced by these creepy murals.
Mm.
It's a very desperate cry for legitimacy where none is going to be found, and it's like, look at us, we achieved liberation. No, you achieved poverty. Congratulations.
I've kind of
So
noticed that in like my drive across America, and just kind of coming from a place where that happened to, in real time you could kind of see where the small businesses were moving out, and they
yep.
were being replaced by exactly what you said. It was first megacorps and then just boarded up buildings with massive murals on it. The more my city went to shit, the less graffiti you'd see everywhere, weirdly. The
Hmm.
more giant murals the city would pay people to sort of cover them up and dissuade people, painting on things to make the city seem like what it actually was. But yeah, that the city got cleaner as the homeless encampments got bigger,
Oh, did
and
like a Xi Jinping visit? Was that why?
yeah,
Because I'm pretty sure that's the only why Americans clean up their cities is because like the leader of the Communist Party shows up.
I mean,
yeah.
in Canada, it could happen at any time.
No, you've got your
Oh yeah,
Canadians
they're
covered.
already here.
Yeah.
But I mean, they didn't really pick up the garbage. Moreover, put a fresh coat of paint and everything, and then hired people to put creepy murals on literally every surface that could get graffitied.
Yeah, yeah. It's just it's a very odd thing to see because like it's what I would expect. It's what I would expect out of not out of sign of desperation, but out of denial. Like it's just, oh, this didn't happen. Like no, we all know what happened. And so that's like, and even as like an expat, if you want to call myself like a Minnesota expat, it's almost like I'm not a refugee, right? I'm not going to compare myself to somebody whose country is a war-torn country, but it's an
Yeah,
odd feeling of
Oh, we
like
do.
yeah.
I there are times where I very badly miss my home until I go there, and then I'm like, I don't know if I want to be here anymore. So, but now I live in a free state, and life is good.
Yeah.
That's
No,
that's it.
you're I don't think you've said it yet on this show. You're in, and we can bleep this out, Arizona.
Yeah, no, it's good. I'm in Arizona, and I run a podcast, and I talk about where I'm at, and I'm hosting events down here. So if
Yeah, I listen to your podcast. I should probably know that you've said you're in Arizona.
yeah, so I gave up absolute anonymity, which is ironic for like I run under the brand name Redacted.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, the joke does not go past me. It is like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, he's redacted. I put my face on things. Oops. So
Yeah.
You live and choose your fights, But no, like we've been talking about all sorts of random shit for a minute, but I've been very bad at directing the thing. Nathan just went from the start, and I was like, I'm just gonna let this go where it goes. But no, Redacted Culture Cast, like, one, how long you been doing that, and two, like, what got you into wanting to do a culture cast and cover this kind of space?
okay, yes. Let's do some of the abbreviated life story too. So short background for myself is I was homeschooled, so I don't know how to socialize with people. Therefore, I talk to a
Hell
computer.
yeah.
But I was homeschooled in rural Minnesota, and at 18, I left for the military and I went into the Ranger Battalion. So I get to say that I was a Ranger for a while. I spent about just shy of 5 years in 3rd Ranger Battalion because I did 4 deployments with them, and then it was a good time. I learned a lot. I grew up a lot. There's quite a bit of culture shock going on. But I left the military in 2013 mostly because I believed that the wars were wrapping up, and I just didn't have. I didn't wasn't motivated to make the next step. I guess it was kind of this weird time. So I left the military, uh, came back to Minnesota, got hit in a motorcycle accident, um met my wife, and went into private contracting. And if people are in the contracting world, they're probably going to be familiar with the program. But because of rules and NDAs, I just don't talk about it. It's just not nearly a secret. It's just not worth it to get in trouble because I said something. And then, so I did some private military contracting for a while, and then I dropped out, or I ended that to go to college. Got 2 degrees, one in philosophy, one in theology, which I used to talk down to people and make them feel bad about themselves. Sarcasm heavily implied. So I got my degrees, and then I went and kind of wandered for a while. It was after I got out of the military where I really hit that post-military depression. Or I'm sorry, after I got out of college when I really hit that like post-military depression. I had been shooting a bunch of competition, kind of working in some local capacities. I was training for some people, or I was helping out with a gun store for a while, and I kind of kept having like a foot in all of these different arenas. But so I got out of the military, or I'm sorry, I graduated from college and hit a slump that hit me like a train of bricks, a brick shit train, a shit train of whatever.
Had
But
you been
after,
kind of like putting that off with the contracting and then college and like everything else? Like you
well,
just
yeah,
how
like
long had it
people.
been at that point?
So I got out in 2013 and I graduated in 2018, and so in
Oh shit,
between, that's some
that's a
time,
while.
right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
yeah, it like 13 to 14 to 15 I was contracting, 15 16 17 to 18 I was in school, I was doing 2 majors, I was loving my education, and then but then I didn't have anything, and like all of that came crashing down because it's like now I don't know who I am, I don't know what I'm doing, I don't have anything to aim at, I feel like I'm lost. And so in this interlude on the history of how Redacted started, one thing that is worth mentioning is find a mentor and don't, you're not alone. Like as isolated as we feel, it's better you're not alone. And I'm not the only person saying that.
Yeah.
So while I was in college, I was writing in different capacities. I'd always been interested in writing. Particularly, I wanted to write and participate in the human corpus of literature. And the and so I ended up publishing a couple of articles, one of them in Overland Journal. I was motorcycle long distance riding and stuff like that. And how you get started in publishing in journals and publications is you write and then you submit it to somebody, and that worked out. And so after some time, I ended up. A good friend of mine told me that Recoil magazine was looking for an editor, and so I submitted my application, and they took me on. They took me on as staff. So I worked for Recoil for just about 2 years. But when that happened, it was not long after I got hired by Recoil. That was in 2020. So you can see 2-year gap, college to
Yeah.
Recoil. 2020 happened, and there was the COVID thing. I was already working from home. It was easy. But then the Summer of Love happened in Minnesota, with Minnesota in the front and
Oh
center.
yeah.
And so all of this experience of military, private contracting, firearms industry, and connectivity all kind of brought me into a position where I was working in kind of multiple capacities. I was helping with some again, private security kind of concept within Minnesota, while the city was trying to burn itself down. And I was writing and editing for Recoil magazine. And so when I was at Recoil, and the one thing that really stood out about the publication, because I had first discovered the magazine in 2013 on a deployment for Ranger Battalion, one thing that really stood out is that it wasn't just about the stuff. It was not just about the things. It was about the people and what's going on and who's focusing on these different stories. And so I found that really encouraging, because if you were in gun culture in 2015, the buzzword of the year was, what was it in 2015? No, it was probably 2014, was situational awareness. If you didn't use the word situational awareness, you were not in gun culture. And then by 15, it was something else, and then like whatever. But so when I was an editor for Recoil, I wanted to see really the philosophy and the culture side of our industry grow, because I had seen a lot of gun culture was coming out of a dark age of anti-intellectualism, which sounds a bit pretentious, but remember, I have a degree, so it's valid. So I hope that comes off.
No,
as
no,
okay.
I think I agree. I mean, I know I agree, because I know what you're
What
about. But yeah,
one of the examples is that you guys had, I think it was Isaac Botkin on your show, and you're talking about first, second, third generation gun culture, or
Yeah.
Yes.
1.0, 2.0, 3.0. And and so while I was an editor at Recoil, I got to see and work in the industry as sort of an industry media guy. And when I left the magazine in 2022, I ended up having a really good work opportunity in Ukraine, which we were doing some counter human trafficking stuff, which sounds really cool, but it was very simple. And I came home from that, and that's kind of when Redacted started. I had met a guy at like a competition somewhere, and we would go out and we'd go grab burgers and beers and talk about stuff. And he kind of pushed me into that direction. And I think you guys got to meet him at the show this year. And so in retrospect, it's a very natural progression, but in my own head, it took a lot of weird steps. And so what the insemination, or the idea of Redacted and the culture cast, and what I wanted to contribute to gun culture, is that the age of anti-intellectualism was going away, and now people cared about their rights and what they believed in. And it wasn't just a Second Amendment. It was like, what do these things really mean? Where do they come from? Because American pop culture had gotten obsessed with using rights as kind of a slur to defend any sort of debauchery we want. And so if we were going to talk about rights, we might as well know what we're talking about, which again is the field of philosophy. And so I wanted to combine these two big interests of mine, gun culture, violence, warfare, how we understand these things, with philosophy, with von Clausewitz, and how we think about what is right and true and good, and how do we understand um, the moral framework in which we are operating, so that when we are in situations like a gunfight, whether it's on a battlefield in a deployed state, or it's just in a self-defense case, that we don't leave that with the same moral injuries that were left on people who entered into those states with no sense of moral framework. Making it simplified, the idea behind the name Redacted is your property means nothing if you don't have privacy. If you don't have access to privacy, if that is denied of you, then what you own, the gun that you have in your safe, doesn't really matter. Because if I know where your guns are, if I know what you own, if I can go to a registry and look up person, name, possessions, then I can easily, as a base level operator. I'm not an operator. I was never in the unit. But as a base level, like violence engaging individual, I can pretty much counter most of what you have. But if I don't know what you have, it's really hard to do a tyranny. And so in our world, especially in America, the foundation that people that I want to help work on and I want to be a part of is, how do we think about our rights? How do we think about violence? How do we think about morality? And how do we address these concepts in a world that benefits by your ignorance or motivating your ignorance? And so that is how we started. And so Redacted I run a podcast. I talk about different topics related to violence, philosophy, culture. Um, I what really kicked me into podcasting was I had the opportunity to go on Tim Pool's show a couple times, and I
The which
saw the
show?
work Tim Pool. If you know who Tim
Oh,
Pool is,
yes. Yes.
I was
he,
I was
he
waiting for Nathan to be like, who?
yeah, he
Huh.
invited me. He invited me onto some of his shows, and so I'm very thankful for that. And that was a good kick in the shorts. So
How'd you
so that's
how'd you get
that's
invited
how I got
on
started.
onto Tim Pool? Was it like it was before the podcast and all that?
It was before the podcast. Yeah, I was an editor for Recoil,
Oh,
and
okay, okay, so it was through that.
he was this was during his time where he was going from, if you're familiar with kind of who Tim Pool has been for a long time, this was when he was going from kind of not really knowledgeable or interested in the gun sphere to very hard libertarian into it, where he was like he got a lot of YouTube fame during the 2020 election and before that, and and I watched him, or I found out that he had, in a very public way, made a pretty solid transition from being, let's just say, loose gun control supporting to very, very opposed to it. And so somebody who I knew him, and we started talking, and he eventually invited me onto the show, which was really cool for me because that was like was a situationally dependent public appearance, and we just had a good conversation about it.
B.R here with a quick word from our sponsors, Attorneys for Freedom, and some all-new additional benefits they've added to their Attorneys on Retainer program. If you're like 90% of our listenership and live stateside in the US and listen to this show, chances are you carry a gun. If you do, you should consider the legal implications of carrying and using that gun for self-defense. Nathan and I use Attorneys for Freedom to give us peace of mind. Attorneys for Freedom offer a drastically different setup to most run-of-the-mill concealed carry insurance programs. Attorneys for Freedom specialize in real criminal defense, providing experienced attorneys on retainer for self-defense cases across all 50 states. Attorneys for Freedom's coverage is extensive, handling scenarios often overlooked by others, such as defensive display of a firearm, self-defense from home intrusion, protection against imminent threats of serious bodily injury or death, and civil lawsuits from attackers or their families, as well as self-defense scenarios such as using while in gun-free zones or sensitive areas, while under the influence or on medication, when you knew your attacker, or while using any weapon in self-defense, from a firearm to household objects or otherwise. But there's more. With Attorneys for Freedom, you're assured of steadfast support without the fear of being dropped or facing payback demands, even in police situations. They're ready to cover 100% of your attorney fees if they can argue self-defense and serious felony charges. Nathan and I have already joined, and it's a breeze for you to do so too. The National Self-Protection Plan kicks off with a $100 one-time fee and just $35 a month thereafter. Opt for family or annual plans for even greater value. Signing up through the link in our show notes or the CBO in our Instagram bio not only supports our show, but also secures you an arsenal of additional benefits. Up to $1,000 towards firearm replacement if confiscated, up to 10 mental health counseling sessions capped at $1,500, legal representation for non-self-defense matters at 35% off attorney rates, and many more incredible benefits detailed via the link in the show notes or at attorneysonretainer.us/artandwar. Ensure you're covered in every state and ready for anything with Attorneys for Freedom. Support the show and gain peace of mind knowing you have the best in legal defense on your side. Thanks for listening, and now let's get back to the show.
I like that. And I also appreciate how easy you are to talk to. I mean, regardless of what your viewpoints are, what you think, where you sit politically, you're someone who can put things through in a very clear and articulate way to anyone, really. But you're also very firm in your beliefs. The whole anti-intellectualism thing is something I've always found really frustrating about the gun community and just kind of the sphere in general. Like, you use big city words. You sound like a faggot. Like, kind of.
It's kind of even more than that. It's like how people have been trained to not give their rights and kind of what it means to have the capacity for violence. Like, it's been so diminished and the respect is just not there, to the point that it's detrimental to like both preparedness and the
Yes.
culture. Like, it's just been turned to, like, we joke on this show a lot about, you know, going and mag dumping and trash, but that is, we say that shit because that is what essentially the culture had been neutered to the point where, like, a guy who thinks he's, you know, ready to stand for his rights and stuff has like a US flag battle worn Cerakoted AR with like without a sling, without a light, and some Amazon optic, and he's like, "Oh hell yeah, dude! I got an AR. I'm ready to fight for my rights." It's like, my brother in Christ, your
Yeah.
BMI is off the charts. Like,
Yes.
Yeah.
no,
What's your mile run time?
yeah,
Yeah, or like what for what? What would you even fight for? Like, would you? I
yeah.
would not go. I'll tell you one thing that I will not go to war for is I will not go to war for bacon. Like, I enjoy bacon, but like that's not going to do it. And how many of those people, how many of us included, when the country was locking down, was entirely mum when they locked down churches, but stood there side-eyed when you could have literal pagan altars built in the streets and people condoning the destruction of society as a celebration next door. It's like, you know we can have a lockdown, but you can have gay pride. Like, excuse me, dude, pick one, right? You can't have both. You can't have it both ways. But we were completely complicit in the destruction of elements of our economy.
I remember when the BLM riots started, and the amount of mental gymnastics that it took different news publications saying, "Hey, the lockdowns are really, really, really important, but Black Lives Matter is also really important, so you should go out there and protest." That's and the false science that started like, oh well, because X and Y, this is not actually a violation of COVID lockdown orders. It's really fucking funny to see. Just
Yeah,
Honestly,
when you start to understand that the people who want to take away your guns view you as a serf to be mined for resources like RuneScape, then you start to kind of change your opinion about having polite political conversations about things. It's like, oh,
yes,
I think you should be a slave. Let's meet halfway. No.
no,
What do you mean
fuck you.
no? This is the best part. This is the funnest part about it too, is that at the ultimate end of the gun control debate is violence. It doesn't matter which direction you go. The ultimate end is violence, because either I will have my potential of violence, or you will engage in a violent action to produce it. And if
yeah.
you dig deep enough into the ideology of this sort of mentality, it's you are a serf, then that's how they think of you. It doesn't matter whether it's a middle class family of four, or like your average whatever voter,
Oh,
or
you can
a
be a successful
politician.
dude who owns like a car dealership. You're still a fucking serf to them.
Yeah. You're a serf because you do not have the right to resist my social justice. You're like, oh,
Yeah,
okay, cool. Yeah, I get it now. I know exactly where we're at in the equation.
I actually I have a very spicy take about the BLM riots. I am
do it, fucking do it.
I am actually incredibly thankful for them, and I think they were, big picture, only a good thing, because it completely broke everyone's fucking brains about that whole situation. Like, at up until there was this like cognitive dissonance of like, we have to stay inside for everyone's safety, but also we have to get out in the streets in mass mobs to like fight for our rights. It just broke the brains of what the messaging ought to be, because they were trying to do too many things at once,
Yeah.
and like it just completely invalidated what the rules were. And I think, in a roundabout way, whatever your beliefs on the situation were at the time or are now, it woke people up to kind of question what they're about and where their line is. And so many people had been like trained to be such good tax cattle for literally fucking decades, and this was like, hey, so there's some pretty intense stuff going on. How'd you feel about that? You think you should be able to go out and get groceries? Because like, they're they're burning down the fucking police station. So like,
Yeah,
Hmm.
should you stay inside too, or should you maybe like sack up and just do your fucking thing, man?
Yeah.
And like,
Why do we give these people authority in the same way? Like, why do you not give them in the sense of like they have a badge or a title, but why do I believe in legitimate authority. There is such thing as legitimate authority, and especially in forms of government. Like, I am not an anarchist by any sense of means, but you cannot claim legitimacy while actively doing all of the things that delegitimize your right to rule or your right to be operating within a sense of government. You go like ask. Let's see. Robert Nozick is one of the most or one of the best written libertarian philosophers, and he wrote a book called Anarchy, State, and Utopia. And the first question in the book is why government at all, and he does a fairly decent job of answering it. And and so the this is where that anti-intellectualism starts to die, is that it doesn't survive anymore. Like, you can't use the Second Amendment as a defense against somebody who believes that you're cattle. Like,
yeah.
oh well, my Second Amendment rights, like they're like, I don't believe in that, and how do you argue with somebody like that? And it's almost counterproductive too. And I admit that there's a certain amount of issue here, but it's almost counterproductive in the sense of engaging in philosophy when the interlocutors that you're engaging with, like David Hogg, who graduates from Harvard for skipping school when his friends get shot at. Congratulations, you got a degree in being a retard. I don't know if I can use that, right?
No, dude,
we
you are totally.
this is a retard friendly show.
Okay,
Yes.
but like the problem with David Hogg is like I actually feel bad for the person. I really do, because he's not a real there's a real person in the sense that there is a person by the name of David Hogg who has a name and who has a father and a mother. He's not like a lab grown person, but his identity, his public identity, is kind of lab grown. Like, it's not really.
Yeah.
It's not like the things that he says on social media are not the things that people say. And so, like, you can't, there's no level of intellect that can address that kind of problem, because he has been promoted and stood up for so much now that where he's at in his life, I don't know if he could have a course change, because what would happen, like, his entire identity would collapse if he had to have a change. And so one of the maybe harsher things about engaging in political philosophy in this sense is that you have to recognize that some people don't make the cut. And I don't mean that you just let them die in the ditch or something like that. I mean, some people just don't have the integrity to engage in a meaningful conversation about what you're talking about. And it's a weird place to be, because in the world of the battleground of ideas, you think that rhetoric and knowledge and philosophy is everything that we do. But one of the things that you have to choose, which the left is very good at, is picking and choosing who they engage with. So
Yeah.
I don't debate plumbing with people who don't believe in pipes.
I think that's actually a really good way of looking at it. And the more I think of it, I've never actually thought of David Hogg as any more of a caricature until now. But he does very much seem like an artificial establishment creation.
Well,
Like
there's so many people like that. They grow themselves to fit in a box that is either marketable or like desirable during a certain point in culture, and you see them crumble. Like, it's happened to, like Steven Crowder, Milo Yiannopoulos, like a whole bunch of other people who existed for a certain period of time and were very effective in that period of time. And then once they kind of like pass the point of being like, their rhetoric is now tired and they're not actually a free thinking or like capable individual thinker. They fit a certain few talking points, and once they clap that out, it's like, oh, yep, into the trash, because you can't keep on evolving. You had a purpose. You were a tool.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up like the Black Lives Matter riots, and one thing that I don't know, it's like a torture process that I don't know if I'd want to have to drag anybody through. But if you go and read their literature, it's kind of uncanny. And so I spent a year reading like left-wing literature, particularly around conflict and warfare. And there's one line that exists, there's one vein of thinking, one intellectual component that can be found in all of their books, from Barbara F. Walters to Ibram X. Kendi to Malcolm Nance to the Antifa Handbook to, let's see, what are some other ones that are on the shelf over there? We'll go with those though. And it's that there's this idea of preemptive self-defense. And so it sounds like there's two really good examples of this language that are used in contemporary culture that as a game of ideas really has an impact on how our society functions. But we're going to use this one of preemptive self-defense right now. Preemptive self-defense is this idea that in a sort of Marxist way, all of population can be divided into different groups. And so
class theory and stuff.
It's kind of class theory is one of them, but there's other examples of how it works, and if you want to get into like philosophy, like true rigorous philosophy, not the kind of pie in the sky whatever I feel like thinking, you're dealing with a subject called metaphysics, and metaphysics sounds really fancy because in 2016 meta was just kind of a trending word, like, oh man, that's so meta, which was cringy as shit, but now we're using cringy and eventually we're going to use something else. Slay queen. But the term metaphysics applies to what is reality, and you could very quickly get into this like not mind blowing, but like unanchored, unmoored wandering through ideas, and that's not where we're going. Metaphysics is a subject of, okay, what does it mean to be a human being? What does it mean to exist? Where did existence come from? What is an identity? Where does it come from? Where is, like, so who is God? Who is man? What is the created world or the physical world? What are abstract objects like numbers and mathematics and physics and science? And so when people talk about science, they're talking about a production of philosophy, and science is a combination of metaphysics and epistemology, because epistemology deals with knowledge and how do we know things. And so it is an epistemological claim, which science is philosophically dependent on, that I can do the same experiment exactly the same and get the same outcome. The idea of observing information is a problem of epistemology. And so instead of making this sound too technical, the idea that is portrayed in the idea of preemptive self-defense is that there is something that is not indicative, but there's something that is part of their target, the fascist, right? There's something about a metaphysical difference between one of us and one of them that is so foundational to their existence that it is inevitable at some time they're going to do a fascism. So, in other words, they're dividing the world into they're not dividing the world. They are building a worldview. They think of the world and in an as if it was an objective case, that the people that they identify as fascists will inevitably one day do a fascism. And so, because doing a fascism is considered an act of violence against myself, I should do violence to them now to prevent that violence, that fascism from happening. And so, at least that's kind of how you depict it in, let's see, some people do it on the basis of race, some people do it on the basis of economic standing, some people do it on the basis of some sort of, not even ideology, but so they don't even believe that you're a human like they are a human. You are human type A and they are human type B, and human type A will always do an evil, so therefore human type B is always at all times permitted morally to do a violence against type A, because type A can't help themselves, because it is ground into their being, or it's a component of their being that is going to do a violence. And so, like, this sounds like all of this kind of big, goofy, out there mentality, but it's quite literally, they think of you as a different species of existence that is justified in being violent to at any given moment, because if they don't put you in your place, you little serf, you're going to do something evil to them. And so we don't think about that. We don't think about people that way. We think about people as individuals who have choices, who make decisions, who can be convinced, coerced, or believe in some sort of ideas, and they don't. They don't believe that you are a rational being. They think of you as a dog that chases cars, but the car is the fascism, and so they have to beat you with a stick or burn your business down so you don't do a fascism.
I mean, I agree with the assessment, but I'd say that's kind of every single ideology where there needs to be an other for the ideology to work is like it always focuses on dehumanizing, like no matter the spectrum we're talking about,
Mhm.
like if there needs to be a scapegoat to put certain people in power, then it's always going to be like, oh well, we need to have power over these people to stop them from doing the thing they're going to do. And that's like whether you're a Republican that believes in sending like, you know, 500 billion to Israel to bomb Hamas until, or all of Palestine until it's dust to make sure they
Yeah.
don't do any more terrorisms, or you're a leftist that thinks, you know, every single person who's voted red needs to be killed because they're only going to turn the country into, you know,
What's the book? Their unofficial Bible is they decided that Harry Potter was not a good enough theology for them, so they moved on to what is it called, where the women read.
fuck,
The
Handmaid's
one
Tale.
it's older,
The
the Handmaid's
Handmaid's
Tale.
Tale. Yeah.
Yep, yep. Yeah. No, I mean now every single like, you know, 45 plus year old man who votes red wants every single woman to live out her days covered. And it's like
Yeah.
that
I
those
mean,
kind of generations that's the only way any of these politics work is by
Yeah.
saying, hey, unless we have power, these guys are going to do something to us, so we need to get in power to um to disarm and subjugate these people so they're no longer a danger. So
yeah.
Yeah,
like
you
Well,
ever see that hypercut of politicians saying this is the most important election of
oh
our life?
yeah.
yes, you have to. You can't not see it. Oh,
Yeah.
oops. Did I just use the Nazi word? Not see? Huh?
Yeah.
What are
But
they
yeah.
doing down there?
What are they doing down there? I don't know. I think they're stealing the parking meters.
That's a good idea. What? Yeah, stealing the parking meters. People are such interesting creatures.
I saw the other day, kind of unrelated, but my little schizo interjection. Um, the IDF said, "Oh, we found this network of tunnels, like Hamas tunnels, with a command center under Palestine." It's like, did your tunnels meet theirs? I'm curious. Did you
Ooh.
just dig into it by accident? Okay, I'm done.
Oh,
Oh,
that's pretty funny. Yeah, that's pretty, like, oh, did your tunnels meet theirs? Oh no,
Yeah,
it's like all of real life is just Terraria. That's just we
yeah.
discovered.
I'm starting to think that an entire like geopolitical region and everyone involved with it just like you can't stop them from getting to the mines. It's all Minecraft. In the very end, like you go deep enough, it's all Minecraft.
I've said it once, I'll say it again. I believe in a one tunnel solution to the Israel Palestine situation.
A one
It's
tunnel solution.
a one tunnel solution.
I like I don't know what you're talking about. I have no idea. That went right. That went.
Did you did
I can't say it went over my head. It went directly under my consciousness. I have no idea what you said.
because they're tunneling. No, did you see
Oh.
did you see the tunnels that the what was it? I don't know if it's Hasidic
The
or
Brooklyn
Orthodox or
tunnels.
whatever the fuck. Yeah, the Brooklyn tunnels the Jews were digging like from under their synagogue.
Yeah, I
You didn't-
saw I saw about it. There was a
okay.
Hasidic. It was, if I understand, it was Hasidic. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Like
Um,
we've just been ripping on it because obviously like the whole thing about Hamas is like, oh, they're digging tunnels into Israel, and then it turns out, well, guess what? They're not so different.
They're not. You're not so different. You and
They're
I.
doing the same thing in New York. It's a one
wasn't
tunnel
but
solution, man.
wasn't the motive for the Hasidic Jewish tunnels because they were tired of getting locked out of their own synagogue, or
I
was
just
that it?
assumed they were indeed stealing the parking meters.
Oh, okay,
No,
okay.
I think it was indeed someone that, like, I think it was a
Because
sect of
like Hamas.
extremists at synagogue.
Yeah, because like Hamas uses tunnels. Like I'm familiar with Middle Eastern terrorism enough to kind of be that like the Israel Hamas conflict is such a non-conflict for me. It's not exactly that. I don't see. I understand where the complication comes from in people's conversation, but from a philosophy of war standpoint, you've got one group of people which is self-identifying as being permitted to commit war crimes as a form of warfare, while the other one is being held to a standard. if the people of Gaza want to stop losing the international battle against Israel, they need to stop calling them a legitimate country. And by stop calling them a legitimate country, you have to stop accusing them of war crimes. Not a country can't do a war crime. So like that's just it. And I'm not talking about like rationality here. I'm talking about that's like the International Court of Law. You can't accuse a non-country of doing a war crime because by definition, according to international conflicts, it has to be a country to do a war. So, but no, like it's just the Hamas is building tunnels to blow up kids and kill families, and the Jewish people in Israel or in New York are building tunnels because they don't like something. I mean, it was hilarious to see. By the way, it's like that some guy was there was what was that video came up not too long ago where some dude was like, I keep hearing people in the walls, and he's like, there's Jews in the walls or something, and which is a horrible line to say. But it's
he was like, I swear to God, I'm hearing Yiddish under my apartment,
and I live in the basement level.
Yeah. I'm on the bottom floor, and there isn't a basement, and I hear Yiddish under me. And then after the news broke, I told you I wasn't crazy.
Also, the moon is made of cheese. Like no.
Fuck it, let's go big.
You can be right about one thing and not right about everything. Okay, it's like that's hilarious. But no, the Israel-Palestine conflict is such a. I wonder how many months it's going to be until that's like yesterday's news.
Yeah.
It depends on how long it takes. It takes the Israeli real estate guys to set up the beachfront homes.
Oh, there you go. That'll do it.
Have you seen? Genuinely, have you seen the ads for that? They're already starting to like show ads for future beachfront properties. Like
that's so brutal.
They're going so fucking overt. They're like, what's a little bit of genocide if we make some coin? You know what I'm saying?
Is that what that's about? I know that the Israeli Hamas or the Israeli Gaza conflict for an international issue is definitely like okay. So I made a pretty bold statement earlier on the show here where I said like the conflict side of it is very easy, right? Yeah. Because it's like you have an army that is the Israel Defense Force, which is being held to a standard that Hamas is not being held to a standard. And so, if you want to have some sort of like legitimate conversation, then you need to recognize that they're already in an asymmetrical war. Like that's very simple. Now the politics and social issues of people living there, there's no way that you can make a statement without pissing somebody off. So
100%.
Yeah, we don't try. We don't try not to piss anyone off. We just talk about it because it's happening. And we probably won't have the perfect correct take on it on this show of all places. But it's
for sure.
Like we're expected to not basically not talk about. We're supposed to, as a culture, we are expected to take the talking points shoved in our face, which is that our very good friends Israel are doing a completely viable and well-behaved war on Hamas, and civilian casualties are not a point of discussion, and we're just meant to kind of plug our ears and keep on cashing the checks until the conflict is over, just like all the other conflicts we get engaged in. And like it's a weird spot where obviously this show is a little different to most people who are going to be waving a Palestine flag and discussing this conflict. But at the same time, if we can't have kind of crude and humorous discussion about these fucked up events, then I don't really know what kind of honest discussion we can have,
Yeah. Well, I mean, like
in a wider sense.
Like Palestine's not a country. It's basically the space where there is no country. And that's unlike an international court issue. It's not like Palestine is not a country like Iran is a country. And so it's like that is, but in the same way, like Kurdistan, there are so many countries around the world, or there are so many stateless nations in the world where you've got massive populations that do not have themselves their own country, that are caught between not a rock and a hard place, but a terrorism and a militarized fighting force that's funded internationally, and they have nowhere to go.
Yeah.
Like you can, yeah, it's terrible. It's the simple argument of the simple issue of the Israeli Hamas war that maybe drives a bone is not even that complicated. It's just like, if you can't distinguish between if you cannot, I'm sorry, the people of Israel are faced with a impossible task to choose to discern between who is a terrorist and who is not. And that is an ugly, but like, I have been there, not to Israel, but I have been in that position, and that is not an easy case. It's just, it's ugly. It's always ugly. When you look into the eyes of like a 15-year-old boy who has nothing left of his existence but hatred, that is tough. That is like, that'll rip your guts out, because you're just looking at somebody whose life is over before it began. And that sucks. And then, like, and the international funding and the money that's being made on the back end and all of this garbage, like, we're spending how many billions of dollars on Ukraine and Israel, but we're completely neglecting our own country. Yeah, that's kind of a tough move. Like, why don't you at least tell me that, if you're going to do that, like, why don't you at least tell me that, like, hey man, I know it's hard for you now, but I believe you're going to make it, but we actually have to we're going to do this for some good reason that actually is reasonable. The best argument that I ever heard for the Ukrainian war would be, why don't we just disable Russia's military for a couple $100 billion, which in the reality of our space costs us basically nothing to destroy a world power's army. And in a sense, we've accomplished that. Does that mean that the smoke and mirrors and billions that have been made by illustrious political families is justified? No. But then let's go back to the conspiracy thing. Names and addresses. Who made $1 billion off of getting kids killed in a foreign country? I want to know who you are. I don't want it to be, it's not a conspiracy if you can identify who's involved. And that's not impossible. It's just, that's how we identify and fix these things. It's like, look, this person this is the person that you're talking about. The train that derailed in Ohio. Who was in charge? Who was responsible? And then and start there. And then that's how you build it. Names and identities. Peoples have will. They make decisions. And so figure out who's doing the thing and punish them appropriately. So
my mind jumps back to what you were saying before, and kind of a lot of this conversation, which um, complicated geopolitical issues are kind of boiled down to, like, well, this side versus that side versus, now we've
Team
given up on Harry
sports.
Potter and we need to follow. As,
mhm.
now Harry Potter's out. Handmaid's Tale is in. Oh well, the world is exactly like Avengers Endgame. Thanos is coming, and we need to destroy him before he can, snap half the population away. It's
Mhm.
we have a
Which
culture.
wait, which half? Because that means a
Which
lot
half?
to me.
Um, shit, I don't know.
Right? Like, where do you just like that was the horror, right? I'm not a Marvel guy, but like, which half? Like, okay, well, if he snaps his fingers, half the population goes away. Which half? Is it all the women? Oh, I'm not okay with that.
Yeah, just all the dudes, all the anyone from Italy.
Thank God that is not half the population.
Italy does not constitute half the population of the world, bud.
Yeah, yeah. For them to be part of the population, they would have to be people.
Oh,
Oh!
Oh,
that's good.
Man, I,
yeah,
I can't
well,
wait to get a short stubby finger from a hairy guy in my chest next time I'm out in public.
we
Yeah,
haven't got any hate mail defending Italians in a little while, so we'll see what happens with that one.
but in a little while. In a little while,
Yeah,
you mean? Are you implying
Oh,
it's happened before?
yes,
this
actually.
is routine. This is good form.
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
no, there was someone who was very upset at my Italian hate talk, and he would yell at me for being racist, and talk about how rich, and I really wish this guy was trolling, but I don't think he was, and talk about what a hateful racist bastard I am, and I would just reply with like pictures of spaghetti.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
They love that.
I have been to Italy. It's a beautiful country.
it actually is. I actually think the Italian hate meme started with a admin who is actually Italian himself. But
Self-inflicted wounds.
How's it going, lads and ladies? B.R here with a quick word from the longest running sponsor of the Art and War podcast, Advanced Warfighting Solutions. AWS have been making tough as hell gear for decades right here in the US in North Carolina. Nathan, myself, and thousands of others run that gear through the ringer and trust our lives to it, whether that's LARPing in the woods or dragging kit through war zones. AWS manufactures many great packs, pouches, plate carriers, and our personal favorite, the SMU Operator Belt. A set and forget gun belt that crushes in build quality, capability, and excellent feedback from its many users. We are tough on our gear here at Art and War, and the SMU takes that treatment in its stride. Though already at a sweet price point, you can knock $10 more off your SMU belt with the code ARTandWar10 at awsin.com. The code and link to the AWS website can be found in the show description. Thanks for listening, now let's get back to the show.
But I do think that a lot of people on a base level rely on there being a good versus evil narrative. They rely on like, this, this segment is doing a genocide and this segment is evil for no reason. And this individual who is leading a country is evil for no reason. And for absolutely no reason at all, this happened. We have to stop them. The forces of good need to get together to defeat the forces of evil. And we absolutely can't, as a culture of people who is so built on simple fiction, acknowledge that everyone can be bad. There can be no good sides and there can be no bad sides. There simply can be complicated situations in which there's no easy way out of them, or assholes on every side.
Often the case.
Yeah, like looking at the nuance, like looking at the cultural implications and nuances of world events like the Ukrainian war that's been a really interesting one for me, because like just personally, is I have kind of arguments on both sides of the fence. I really do. Like, I feel like the thing that's missing in the Ukrainian war is that we never got a resolution to the Cold War. It just sort of ended, and
well, quote unquote ended.
Well, it just sort of ended, as in like the Bretton Woods agreement kind of continued on, and we didn't really have like an enemy to fight, and we didn't really know, like, it seemed like there was a void, and that's trying to fill that void. Just like the Afghani war came to an end because Americans really no longer kind of believed in anything that they were doing, so they just said we're kind of done-ish.
Maybe
like, Yeah, like, I mean, why isn't Afghanistan a territory of the United States? Like, if we really were a tyrannical empire, we would have like colonized this shit out of that country, but we didn't. We just we went after some terror cells and then made a lot of money for ourselves. So, like, if the purpose of invading Afghanistan was also to establish some sort of forward observation post on an international level to be able to have kind of eyes into whatever's going on in the Russo-China Empire, then like, why did we just leave? Well, we didn't, or something like that. Like, because the Taliban actually believed in their worldview. We just kind of gave up on ours, and that's really tragic.
I mean,
So,
do we even, like, I don't want to say we, like, do you think the U.S. government has a genuine worldview, and what?
Yeah. No, I do. I think so. The U.S. government as a whole is too big to dissect, but I think the Biden family is in for self-enrichment. I don't think there's anything complicated to them. He's just a dementia patient. He's just a mob boss with dementia. Like the Biden, like, that's pretty simple. It's like Kamala Harris probably worships herself in some very creepy kind of way. The current presidency is very much so a theocratic, like, everything that you hate, everything that we're taught in school to hate about like the Spanish Inquisition, just change it from like the red robes to like a gay pride flag, and then it's Biden. Like, it's the same thing. They're just like, they're looking for some sort of holy purity that gives them some sort of indicative better than thou position, and they're making $1 billion while doing it. And so like the remainder of the government is caught between recognizing the rights of the individual or believing that the world is being recreated in their image. It's really, I mean, I'm not saying it's simple. I'm saying that the issue that is going on in American politics and government right now is a religious issue. it is an issue on a fundamental religious problem, and that is, where does authority come from? And it's very simple. Like the intelligence agencies, how many wars are going on around the world that we don't know about? How many of them should be going on? Do you really want the average American voter who struggles to read a book to have some sort of authority over the assault of legitimate human trafficking rings? If we really concerned ourselves about human trafficking, why would we support Black Lives Matter, and while leaving a border open? Like, the fundamental issue in American politics is the identity of the government, and it believes that it is God and you should worship it, and so it's trying to force people into subjugation, and it's very unfortunate.
So let
But
me.
that's a really aggressive way of saying it. I'm sorry.
No. This is something I'm curious about because over the years, I have penned myself. I think I have emerged from this a little bit, but I have very much built myself into a space, and not quite an echo chamber, but it has at times been an echo chamber of heavy anti-government types. Like, basically everyone I know in this space is like heavily anti-government to a degree. And I'm curious, and this is might be a loaded question, but like you said earlier, I'm not an anarchist, which I don't expect every single person we interview to be even remotely close to where I'm at. But do you see a path forward where you could believe, or if you do believe in the U.S. government as an institution?
Yeah, I think it's achievable through decentralization. I think it's achievable in the same way that a child becomes a man and realizes that he doesn't need to ask his dad for permission to get a job or build a home. I think it's the same way that we look at it that way. There's like a steady there's good examples of it on the surface level. So like one of them would be right to bear arms. Is we're not winning in every front, but we are winning on a certain cultural front, and that we are returning to a state of balance, which we're moving towards a state of balance with permitless carry.
Yeah.
And so the people who are viewing you as a slave no longer have the institutional power in the same way that they used to. Because now the only way to support gun control is to collect as many illiterates and children as you can and bribe them with government money to go and beat up their neighbors and take their stuff.
Truly.
So like so I don't I'm not a fatalist when it comes to the American government. I may not be optimistic, but I think one of the best things that I ever heard on the subject is, it took us 100 years to get here. Do you really think we're going to fix it in one election? The answer is no. But so I am not so my political views against what you would refer to as like anarchism is, I don't see it as anything different than like Ayn Rand libertarian utopia. I think libertarianism is a really good set of moral values to live by, but it's not a format for establishing a legitimate government. I believe that I'm closer to maybe an oligarchic or monarchic individual, where I recognize that some people are capable and are, in a sense of like a division of labor, good for operating systems of government, in the same way that not everybody is an airplane scientist, or like an airplane scientist. Shit, not everybody is a rocket scientist, a Navy SEAL, or like whatever you want to be. I don't think that personal fulfillment and participation in society simply comes from doing what you want. Rather, I think it comes from being a useful member of your society. And so I think that what I would like to see in American politics is a continual decentralization, where we leave Washington, we start like rescinding power from Washington through focusing on things that are meaningful to us. And I think here's a good example of where I think it is actually happening. There's in the town that I grew up in, the in the town that I grew up in, the city, it's a rural town, but for a while the political class of that small town were um, not working in the favor of the people, and you started to get a lot of, remember, Minnesota is very like politically, it's a political hegemony, not a hegemony, it's a political monoculture. And so you were getting like people who couldn't be as racist as Mayor Frey, or you people who couldn't be as tyrannical as like the Minneapolis government. They weren't good enough at being a shitty human being, so they decided to get like a B-rated job. Think of yourself as like, I'm not good enough to be Stalin. I'm like a B-rated Stalin at best. So they were moving into smaller towns and kind of encapsulating the resentment of populations there to get themselves into positions of power, mayors, city boards, city councils, and stuff like that. My parents' church got together and they ousted 3 of them, replacing them with city board, or replacing 3 members of the city board, because the fathers, mothers, brothers, and people of that town realized that just like Washington, D.C. was not going to come to the salvation of Minneapolis and Minnesota, Minneapolis is not going to help the small town that they're from. And so they're like, well, this is our hometown. We've lived here for 3 generations. We know what's best. Putting a new road through the Larson's farm is going to be a bad thing. We should not replace every single restaurant and historical building in our town with Omega Mart, big generic whatever. And they started repealing the influx, because just like America's receiving is receiving what people like to call illegal migrants as whatever, refugees. So this town was being flooded with the offwash of other cities, because they were willing to try to look after them, and it was creating a domestic hellhole for its own citizens. And so they decentralized. They didn't just like, okay, we're the little town in rural Minnesota did not like burn down Minneapolis and then liberate themselves. They just said, yeah, we're done with this now. We're going to pay attention to what's inside of our control. And I think that's what it looks like in this country is if you want to see peace and some semblance of a equilibrium return to American statesmanship in politics, then we need to have equal parts attention to what we have control and authority over and what we don't. Because I am not going to change the mind of Joe Biden. I don't care. But I do have influence over my friends. I do have influence over my community. And I think that's how it starts. Or like the brace ruling. Okay, so the ATF gets marching orders from a tyrant to say, hey, we're gonna attack pistol braces because Republicans like AR-15s, and if we can demoralize them, they won't vote at the ballot box. Okay, they didn't choose AR-15s as the target of the whipping boy of the firearms industry because they think they're violent and dangerous. They chose them because they identify that visually, like a cue or an icon in a video game, with bad guy. If they like that, they bad guy, and so I take bad guy's thing away, so bad guy be sad. And the entire firearms industry was like, oh, okay, cool, we don't care, thanks. Like, I don't need to, like, why do I listen to you anymore? And unless you're going to go attack somebody and then you're going to make enemies. And so like my criticism of anarchy isn't that it doesn't present arguments like no man should be able to dictate what another person does with his body, or that we are sovereign in the sense that we are individuals that are responsible for our own lives. It doesn't sufficiently. It's arguing against a straw man version of government. The purpose of government is to protect the rights of the individuals and settle grievances, and we can do that. Okay, so if your city is being burned to the ground by violent mobs, who is the DA? Okay, that's a simple answer. They're not the DA anymore. Their job is done. They are anathema from society. Tattoo their face with a giant mark so everybody knows who they are, so that they have to pay twice for groceries and they don't get gas in their car because they have burned your city to the ground. And then elect somebody else and have ownership over your property and have ownership over your town, because it's frightfully what's a good cultural word? It's kind of a cuck move. Is that popular anymore?
I think people still understand.
Yeah,
it's kind of a cuck. It's kind of a cuck move to blame the world for your problems, but never go out and be a part of your community. Never try to add value to somebody's life. So that's there are no shortage of grievances that can be leveled against the government. But so long as they remain as grievances that can't be remedied, then we're going to continue down this death spiral. So
it's interesting. I sent you down that spiral just because it's
It was
so often
interesting,
that
though.
no, it was. I like one. I want to get a temperature check from someone who is not precisely where I am, because it's easy enough for us to sit here and like, you know, myself and
Proselytize.
someone, yeah, so someone else I know is basically where I'm at to bullshit about that. But
Yeah.
I'm curious, one kind of where the people who, not that it's like burn it all down, but people who are just ready to kind of interestingly enough, just ignore it and live on their terms regardless. Which it's interesting you touched the brace rule because while there are maybe differences in what we would write down as our beliefs and like expectations of like peace on paper, the fact of not participating in things that are knowingly tyrannical and have like one that are unenforceable and you don't believe in them, like that's a big part of kind of everything I believe in. And I don't care what your where you come from, what your beliefs are, how you want to live, what kind of community you want to live in. It just comes down to if you believe you have a right to put a boot on my neck to support your lifestyle. That's where I'm like, really,
yeah,
I see
so
like
you do believe, you do care about my beliefs, because if I believed that coercion was a moral acceptable action for a government, then you would disagree with me. Now
yeah, no,
we agree on this one. Like, we don't agree on coercion in certain senses. Although unless you're a pedophile, then I don't really care about what you think.
I mean, for
I,
me on stuff like that, I think there are certain actions a human being can do that disqualify them from having human rights of any description. And
Oh, so is this a Rousseau or a John Locke argument? Now we're getting into the fun
I think this is a
material. So,
147 grain subsonic argument.
I,
uh,
I
good, 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 good.
honestly, it doesn't even have to get down to like 500 pages of theory for me. I think it's simple, like treat others how you want to be treated. Like
In this we agree. And so where we find issues in, not you and I are just, and like, I hope you
no, no,
know that
no,
I'm not trying to throw
no, no.
spears at you in this one.
Well, and I didn't want to I didn't want to come after you like with any gotchas. I'm just genuinely curious because I
Yeah.
think a
So
lot of people hear the A word and they think that we're so far apart, like, not you and me, but like me and someone who might call themselves a constitutionalist or like who believes in a decentralized government is like, we would, in all likelihood, be perfectly happy being neighbors. In fact, we would probably like line up on at least 70% of issues in terms
yeah.
of how we want to respect each other, if not more. And it's just
Hmm.
interesting to me to kind of, again, I don't want to like stand on my soapbox or anything, but it's interesting how the framing of where everyone's at in terms of what they will tolerate from a government and what they desire in terms of liberty actually is, if you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah. So like, you and I, like, when you hear people talk about it in politics and they say we have more in common than we have in difference, that applies to you and me. That does not apply to me and somebody who calls themselves a communist. Like, I don't. There is very little that I have in common with you. I don't. I believe that we are human beings, not objects of the state. And so there are. It's kind of like the loose problem of generalizations, and where I'd be interested to see where you and I find a strong disagreement, like a strong
No,
disagreement.
I was like probing, but I didn't want to like. I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think of something I could just throw out there to spice it
Yeah,
up. But
like,
like,
because I don't think anarchy is a legitimate form of society. That's because there
hmm,
is no such thing as anarchy. It's just, anarchy is sort of the reduction of might makes right. But I do believe that there are strong limitations that should be placed on any individual or group's authority over the lives of other people. So
I simply believe that no one holds like I I think the quickest way to sum it up to probably the majority of people listening is while I'm myself not a Christian, I really like how Christian anarchists phrase it, which is no king but Christ. Like
Yeah.
no single man on this earth is my daddy or has a better idea for how I should live my life. Now, if I'm going
Mm.
around like impeding, imposing, basically putting someone under my boot to make my life better, whether I'm taking 5 cents out of their pockets or making them my slave, like they have
Mm.
every right to blow my fucking head off. Like I have zero whatever my excuse for doing so. If I say I'm gonna put my boot on your neck to make sure that disabled children in wheelchairs get an education. Oh, well, that's a really nice thing of you to do. However, like even if they are the person's children that I'm putting my boot on his neck to make him pay to, you know, to make this thing happen, to educate these kids or look after them or whatever. Like, I
Yeah,
have
yeah.
no right to force them to do that just because it might be the right thing to do, quote unquote, or whatever. That's like
Yeah, yeah.
a
You can't
cartoonish example, but
you can't coerce somebody into doing something that is supposedly good. Yeah, this is
Yeah,
a fundamental
regardless of
problem.
the reasons. Yeah.
If it's you can't do good if it's not by choice.
yeah,
That's an issue,
and
right? So like voluntary, it needs to be voluntary.
yeah,
How would you then
and
how do you adjudicate differences between people? And I don't mean this in like what is the old gotcha that people try to throw at libertarians, like, well then where would there would be roads, and it's like, dude, I know how to build a road, okay?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
There are
You know,
roads a
like
hell of a lot longer than there's been income tax.
yeah, well, you know, it's like, well then I'll invent a plane. Okay, you know, I don't know, right? It's dumb arguments, but um then like how do you, and I'm actually following I'm kind of working down some of the thoughts of Nozick as well on this one, is like, then how would you adjudicate grievances between peoples where one person thinks it's coercion and the other person does not?
it's an interesting question because, like, I mean, what is coercion? It's making someone do something they are not willing to do, right? Like,
Yeah,
generally,
absolutely.
like, so what is a? Can you think of any good reason to coerce someone? Like, full stop.
Yeah, we brought it up a couple times. If somebody thinks that it's a morally acceptable sexual proclivity to desire to prey on young children or traffic other people, right? They don't see it as coercion because the persons that they're trafficking are not people. They're whatever slur that you want to throw in now. Like, it's a there's no they don't believe that what they're doing is a form of coercion because they're not dealing with people. Now, I don't respect that person, but that's an issue. Or let's see, what's another example? Charging different prices for different individuals. Like, because you have your hair color is one color, you have blue eyes and I have green eyes, therefore I'm going to charge you double.
Mm.
You know, like, there's points of arbitration that, like, it's because I am a Christian in the sense, or not in the sense, I am a Christian in saying that, like, I derive the value of human people from them being created in the image of God. Not everybody thinks that way. Not everybody thinks that people have inherent value. If you're a communist, you don't think people have value, they just have the utility for you. If you're a socialist, you don't think that people have value, they're just money. You don't, if you're if you view people in any form of property, like, you don't, we don't have the same worldview. And so while we may, as a Western society, acquire data points from, maybe acquire the ghost of values past from what people like to call Judeo-Christian, but that's way too simplified of a series of problems, because it's sort of Judeo-Christian Enlightenment combinations here. The there's gonna eventually we're gonna run into a disagreement where I think it's coercion. Property. What about a property dispute where, like, we disagree on what the property is, and it's on your property, but you think it's yours, and now if I go and take it, you're going to shoot me or something. Like, that's how do we protect those things? And then anywhere where you start to have judgments is where you start to ground the concept of government. That doesn't mean that we need to create an all-powerful authoritarian state. It's that that's why I think decentralization is a good answer, because I want the people who have authority over adjudicating grievances to have one, I want them to have a social and very physical consequence to the society that they're involved with, but also a method of resolving grievances with the state. And what we don't have right now is a method of absolving or correcting grievances with the state. And so
You
you could
like the individual solving grievances like directly with the state, or like what do you mean by that?
well, I mean, why isn't there an entire group of people in prison right now for the rest of their lives because they decided to close down churches?
Mm.
Or why isn't there an entire why is the head of the ATF still allowed to hold a job in polite society? Why has he not been fired? Because he legitimately just ad nihilo created a ban on an object that people owned. Like, okay, that is a disqualifier for your position in government because you do not believe in government. You believe in tyranny. I don't.
Well, and
And
that's that right there, and I don't think we'll find a disagreement here. Is aside from this part, like that's why I inherently disagree with the institution of government. Like
yeah,
what
okay.
like what we were talking about, like the examples given about grievances and issues that come up in society, like things that would be kind of like civil court level, or things that
Mhm.
mediators have been kind of figuring out long before there was massive states. But like
Mhm.
all of those things are kind of a maybe of anarchism versus the
Ah,
guarantee of the vast amounts of tyranny and complete like literal law. It's what some people call anarcho tyranny, which I have
yep.
my issues with the term. I get it, it does make sense. Like what they're saying is the people in government don't follow the fucking law that their government sets forth for all of us lowly serfs and tax cattle, but like they can do whatever they want with no repercussions because they are part of that institution. And
Mhm.
throughout history, every single time you centralize power and give the swords and the guns and the rights to kill, for the greater good, to one collective, they will absolutely fucking use that to empower and enrich themselves, no matter how well intentioned the government starts out. Like, it starts out with a bunch of, a bunch of people fleeing for religious and personal freedom, shooting and fucking up the biggest empire on earth, and not even 250 years later, we have one of the most powerful governments who are so invasive of the individual's life. Like, the founding fathers would spit on every single employee of the federal government. Well,
Oh man,
I think
not
yeah,
not
they would
not
have.
Hamilton. Hamilton would probably have a wet dream about what's going on, but
Oh, Hamilton. Yeah,
but you get my point. Like,
I
government to
do.
me is the guarantee of like just the grossest and most automatic repeating intrusions on people's lives, and the most egregious breaches of human rights automatically. Like, whether it's, we're talking about the sexual abuse of children, like child
Mhm.
protective services, like and the public education system, things that we're all
Yeah.
paying for, are doing like a fucking industrial machine the most
Mhm.
irreparable harm every
Does
day and every hour.
does an individual have a right to submit themselves to future coercion? This is getting super theoretical, right?
I'm
So
here for it.
so
so
so let's
interesting.
so let's go
I should have
ahead.
made popcorn before this.
No,
It's just
no,
like
it's funny. We don't really have conversations like this. This is kind of like
no,
the.
it,
I don't
it's
want to
funny how
drag everyone down like the
no, no,
libertarian
no,
podcast circle jerk. It's just interesting
yeah,
to actually discuss it a bit more in depth than we have
yeah.
in quite a while.
Discuss theory between some smart fellas and me and me.
You mean
And
between
they
Forrest and B.R? There's only one smart fella.
stop. Don't let's not get into like self-deprecation any further. It's entertaining because I think we're on a good vein here, and
Yes.
I appreciate this too because one thing that I want to encourage in our fellow men is fellow men and women is like these are okay conversations to have. These are actually good conversations to have. That like
Yeah.
it's what got me into studying philosophy. Is that like went as a kid, as a younger man, even like I didn't enjoy reading. I didn't enjoy reading at all. Not very much. Okay, with exceptions. I didn't really like because I kept trying to read books that like the Aragon series with the dragons was really popular, and I kept trying to read these books, and like I just didn't find them interesting. And then I was like, okay, so I picked up Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged, and I was like, oh, this is a fun book. And then I picked up Anti-Fragile, Nicholas Nassim Taleb, and it's like, okay, that's when I started reading. Or not Robert Nozick. Let's see, it's on the shelf here. Whatever. Kenneth Royce, and Jack Donovan, and the this is one thing that I think well, this is one thing that I really that Americans particularly make me depressed about is that if you look at the history of mankind has built institutions which become corrupt, and then they start turning in on themselves. And what happens then is all the good talent leave that institution and they start another one. And so as like a pseudo academic in this sense, we look at the ivory tower of what we call academia and its colleges and its institutions and this like the world of the philosophers as complete utter what in term of philosophy we call as philofasters. It's like this fake philosophy stuff. It's navel gazing. It's garbage. And so what happens is that grows and it festers. So people leave that institution and they go start their other. Now, we as Americans can't exactly leave America and go start America too,
No,
but
they
we
don't like
can.
that. They generally burn down your church.
Yeah, right. We can't go start America too, but what we can do is withdraw from institutions that are no longer ethical, especially intellectual institutions like what we're talking about here in regards of government, and start building fresh. And it doesn't mean that we're going to get a third party and a two-party system immediately or even at all. You might end up with what happened with Lincoln, regardless of him being somewhat of a war criminal, is that the Whig Party kind of disappeared and the Republican Party appeared. And then you might have like we are the core element of Americanism philosophy is that we are Americans. We're not servants of the American crown. And so if we can change our worldview from the latter, servants of the American crown, to the prior, that we are Americans, that we have some authority over what goes on in our life, then we start making decisions. And that also applies to like what we think about here, because you and I were talking about this of coercion. If my friend decides that he is going to voluntarily submit himself to future coercion, is it my duty to stop him from that coercion? I don't know. That this is what we talk about.
No, this is an interesting thing because, like, I think a lot of people when they hear the word anarchy or a stateless society, they think of like, you know, 350 million or however many are in the U.S. All being hermits living in caves, having no social contact, and it's like, well, obviously not. We're naturally
Mm-hmm.
we're social creatures. We need groups to survive, and even your basic community, like you can't be the Navy SEAL, the farmer, the technician, the mechanic, all the rest of it. Like we have to kind of have a diverse group of skills to be successful
Mm-hmm.
as a society. But at the same time, like so, some communities just don't fucking work. Like some people don't need to be forced on each other, and oftentimes don't want to be. Like it's funny how 2020 really woke up a lot of people in terms of like who they surround themselves by, because all of a sudden, instead of having access to the world, or at least what they perceived as it, they were suddenly like, oh well, I'm at home with neighbors, and really when it comes down to it, it's just the people to the left and right of me that matter. And figuring out, maybe we don't need to be in this massive machine, but it's actually a lot more valuable to really um to really have high value people around us that work with our lifestyle, I think kind of what you're saying with this decentralized government thing, that's how I view anarchism. It's like it's that's what America should be to me, is just many, many, many communities who are generated by people who want to be a community, not people who are corralled together like little kingdoms for tax purposes and to be under the watchful, loving eye of Big Brother. It should be people who want to live next to each other, who have shared values, and you're never going to get that from clocking everyone over the head every 4 years saying you guys need to all line up, like this is the way we're doing things now, and if you don't like it, that's too bad, like good luck in 4 years
Mhm.
time, we'll have rigged those motherfuckers too, and you can deal with it then. Like instead, if like every 4 years shouldn't be us fighting over a buttered up gun in the room and like thinking that
Yeah.
like and hoping that we get to hold it, like
Yeah.
that's not
But it's still
that's
a
not
Joker
worthwhile.
gun, just a flag that says bang, except for it's like just
I have the
oh.
power now. Okay, whatever. But like seriously, I want in America, like even if the government is still a thing, which obviously, my perspective, I hope we get a sandbag in office and the whole building fucking collapses. But until then, like a much better path towards a prosperous future, in my eyes, is one where people build their own communities, whatever that looks like, surrounds themselves with good people, and lives on their terms. And that's going to take it's going to become a million different flavors, but it won't be this kind of self-destructive downward spiral of we all need to be on the same page and that's the only way we're going to achieve peace, because that's not humans, that's not society, and that's certainly not America with the amount of different cultures we have here.
You are and you see this reflected in gun culture where it's like we
Yep.
all need to get together and do a thing, and it's like that
We
it's
we can all
I'm
we can share
I'm not a
platforms, but
I'm not a I get what you're saying, but like who's going to take the first step? Who's going to say here I am, send me? Who's going to volunteer? Like, you look at so much of let's just talk, let's go really deep in the rabbit hole. Let's talk about like boomer shooting competitions. Okay, when I first started shooting some competitions, I went to some, and I haven't shot in like a USPSA or an IDPA competition for like 5 years. So I know things have changed. But like when I first went to a couple competitions, I was hot off the ego block of Ranger Battalion, and I remember going to a couple of those competitions that were a lot of like, oh, this is not good. It's just old men trying to tell me how to who don't it was tough, right? There's and I have to admit some semblance of like, oh, maybe I came in with too much ego. Maybe I was the dickhead. Maybe I was the young upstart who didn't have the chops to hack it. But what in IDPA, like that, yeah, sure. The first match that I went to was extremely antiquated. It was like the rules where you couldn't actually have a stage plan. It was kind of predetermined by some sort of scenario, like you're on a canoe getting robbed by three people or something, and you have to shoot, two shots to target, two shots to target, two shots to target, 1-1-1 or something like that. There's some sort of determined order, and it like from a guy who's coming out of Ranger Battalion who like thinks he knows how to shoot pretty good. He's thinking like I'm sitting there going like, well, I wouldn't do it that way. I'd like freaking blaze this and do that, but it doesn't matter because this is the rules or whatever. And there's a bunch of older guys there that have been there, and it's kind of like their social club. And now that I'm not saying I've matured a little bit. What I'm saying is, what sustained those was volunteers. People would come every week or every month, and they would show up early, and they would help to volunteer the stages, and they'd help to put things together, and they would volunteer their time. And there's a really good example of that out of how the competition scene in Minnesota grew, because um, through the voluntary actions of a group of individuals, they created an extremely welcoming, robust, aggressive competition scene for USPSA. And it's just because people chose, like they volunteered their time, and I don't want that to be lost. I don't want that.
Yeah.
I don't want that mentality to be lost. And while I may be giving credit to them now, outside of people who went to those competitions, they're probably never going to get credit for it. Like no one is going to, I doubt anyone's going to go to Josh Freilich or Adam Maxwell or Mark Stevens, like, and write a book about how they contributed to like the great success. And I'm a writer and I haven't written one either, but how they contributed to like community building in the upper Midwest on around competition shooting and capability. They've all kind of grown, and I just don't want that to be lost in our generation. You can volunteer and support things; it's worth it in the long run.
No, I
So
and that's, like, hopping back on my soapbox, that's kind of like the reason I do anything I do online, is because I love people who build things so deeply, and that's the only way to have any kind of future, no matter, like, whether it's like just a culture and scene you're in, you have to, like, do it yourself, DIY, like, you have to be the I hate going to something I love and just seeing, like, some kind of event or whatever the hell it is, and just seeing no effort being put in, because I'm like, fuck, well, if no one else, then it has to be me, right? Like, if no one else is
mm-hmm.
making something happen, and that's something that I hope as many people in as many spaces as possible kind of take to heart, is like, you again, like, you don't have a daddy here, like, to do things for you, like, you have to be the dude that makes something happen if nothing is going on.
Yeah, and when somebody else does that, like I love seeing their success.
Yeah.
That was I mean, like that was a big takeaway for me this year at SHOT Show, is like we can be happy for other people's success. It doesn't
Yeah.
always have to be tyranny and greed. It's like, you know what, this guy built something pretty big. I think it's cool.
Yeah.
You know, the whole Goon culture thing, like people who hate on Goon culture, it's like, dude, you okay, you know, whatever. What makes you any different than the Goon culture hating on the like the vet bro thing, and like I'll put on my, like, you know, Putin interview, like I was there back when, you know, kind of joke, but like the different, there are things that I have moral issues that people do, and that is fine. And if you're doing something shitty and I don't have a relationship with you, how am I going to hold you accountable? I'm not, because I'm just going to call you out for clout. Okay, are there clout chasers? Yes. Do we care? Not really. But I think that seeing people succeed is a good thing.
Yep.
And so,
Well,
yeah.
I think that, and this is something that I complain about a lot. Sorry, now I'm finally jumping back in. It is a lot easier to be negative than it is to be positive, and whether that's
Yeah,
being
very sure.
negative about, yeah, we talked about it a couple weeks ago, just like, oh well, if you run a micro rig, you suck. If you were in the middle, like, people will take things that can be even valid, like toxic bro vet culture is awful, but that doesn't necessarily mean bro vet culture has to be toxic, or you know, the aspects that you see, or you know, insert anything else, the Goon thing, the people who run micro rigs, you know, taking a CQB course, whatever. People will take the worst aspects of it and make vast generalizations and just be like, oh, if you're doing X, or if you're wearing X, or if you buy a product from X company, you are the problem. And I
Sure.
find,
If I
yeah,
Yeah, go ahead. I interrupted you. My bad.
no, you're totally okay. It is easier to be negative and whip people up into a tizzy than it is to make people be positive about something, or come together, or even just leave other people alone. You know, everyone here is an adult and they can spend their money however they want. Just don't be a dick. I think that's the big thing. Don't be an
Yeah.
asshole.
Yeah. Now, if you're about to jump down somebody's throat for some stupid take they took on the internet, are you doing that because you want to see them feel bad, or are you doing it because you're genuinely care about their well-being? Like, you know, a pistol safety thing, right? So for some reason, like carrying a handgun without a round in the chamber is back in the chat now, and if you go into the
Really?
Fucking
right
really?
circle somewhere in
We're
Twitter,
still
it
talking
came
about
up.
this.
No, I mean it's whatever. I don't think it's as I don't think it's as prevalent as I might have made it out to be. But like I've seen a couple things pop up in the social media space about like carrying a handgun without a round in the chamber, and like if I genuinely care about your well-being, I'm gonna come to you and say like, hey man, you should probably become comfortable enough for carrying a gun with a round in the chamber before you if you know like that should be your goal. I because I actually care about you. If you have to use that for self-defense, I don't want to be reading you obituary of like didn't have one in the pipe. Oops. You know,
Yes.
like I don't want to be reading that. I also believe that you're a capable human being and you're capable of that level of competency.
Yeah.
So, but if I'm like, "Oh, you're dumb because you don't carry around in the chamber," like am I it really comes down to self-reflection. Am I just doing that to make myself feel good? Or is it actually effective? And I'm certainly not. This is not a novel idea. It's just something that's become relevant again. And
Yeah.
like what is Goon? What did bro vet culture do? Well, it did help quite a bunch of veteran dudes who are getting out of the GWAT, who are lonely, depressed, and couldn't get a job in white collar work because they fit the demographic of we don't want you.
Yeah.
And so they rallied around an idea. What did the Goon culture do? Well, if you're into like different communities like skating and emo and black shirts and whatever, or like night vision and stuff like that, there are a whole bunch of people coalesced around that. And
Oh, and in
um
defense of goon culture, like it proliferated civilian ownership of nods. Like, I
Actually,
yeah,
yeah.
dude.
things like that. Like, of course, like Nathan was saying, we can always extract like the very worst things of anything. Like, it's easy to tear the shit out of something
Yeah.
at all of
Yeah.
its worst parts. But giving Brovet Brovet culture the recognition it deserves is actually really fucking valid. Like, genuinely, that whole like veterans of prior wars coming home and feeling isolated and alone, like, sure, like, the Guat vets coming back, and there's Oakley's, things get a little bit douchey here and there, but that's a whole lot of fucking people who needed to find brotherhood after the military to not be another fucking statistic. And I think in large part these might be not the most aesthetically pleasing warrior lodges. Our time is lacking a little bit, but it's something, and that's like an ancient practice
Hmm.
that is necessary in our culture. It's a shame it comes in the form of Oakleys and uh what is it, grunt style t-shirts, but it's, like you said, like a real thing that has done a lot for people.
Yeah, it was. I mean, like it was a whole like micro generation. It was like a whole microcosm, and I kind of fit at the tail end of that one. And in the world of like the bro vettiness, this and some of this is kind of how Redacted came about too, is because like I was in Ranger Battalion at a time where it was that like it's in retrospect everything's 2020, but it was a very like anti-intellectual period. Like again, oh, that's too many words, it's suspicious. We listen to, it's like it's very much, and there were and which is this is the thing too, is like I have reconnected with some people who I served with 10 years ago now, and so many of our lives have changed. And so like if I were to hold them to the standard, if I were to hold them to who they were 20 years ago or 10 years ago, I would be doing them a disservice. But like, you look back and we're like 19-year-old, 20-year-old kids going to war on our third deployment or second deployment. And it's like who all moved out from home and had different melting pot issues. But the one thing that stood out or continues to stand out, kind of like drive in my end, is that there is there is an intellectual side to the gun culture question, and it is being made very prevalent right now in this conversation that we've been having about like anarchism versus um, whatever my political theology is, or different kind of conversations about different worldviews. And like it's it's going to stray towards live laugh love level like cringiness, but like there's whatever, dude. I guess like
Well,
I
no,
like I like the aesthetic of some of the Goon culture stuff, because like the low lighting, the photography, the like the juxtaposition, of the helmet nods and Wendy's is just funny for me. It's like, oh yeah, like it's America, like what do you expect, right?
Yeah,
It's
no,
just like
I think
it's
in 6 months everyone will have forgotten about it. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
oh, you're right.
Like,
Yeah,
forgotten
yeah,
about the hate that is. It's
sure.
yeah,
There'll always be somebody to complain about it. And
100%.
if you're new to gun culture, or if you've been in here for just a couple of years, my old man advice is if you find somebody who's constantly in a controversy and starting that controversy, they constantly have a finger in something that's like, oh man, talking shit about everybody else, or whether they're doing it artfully or tastelessly, like just keep your distance. I would highly recommend keeping your distance, because that is a revolving door of misery.
yep.
And some people make a name for themselves talking shit. Um, but it's kind of like the game on the world stage, and is there's this old metaphor that kind of got thrown around a lot, and that is that the loudest person at the bar is probably not the dangerous person. And now that millennials and Gen Z don't go to bars anymore, it kind of is lost. But like the when it comes down to the application of force and engaging in violent situations, um, people who are there is a drastic there's an inverted relationship between people's capability of violence and their willingness to telegraph it. I'm using telegraph in the same way that you talk about like in video games, like
Emoting.
Elden Ring or whatever, like
Ah.
where you're watching the boss, and when he does a certain thing, he's going to attack a certain way. Um, People who are good at violence are very good at veiling that telegraph, so that so that you have no reason to know that it's going to happen, because they're playing on a very different game than you. And I'm not saying it's dishonorable or it's honorable. I'm not talking about honor versus dignity culture. I'm talking about purely the application of force. And so when you're talking when we get onto like the international stage, or not even the international stage, when we talk about like the use of force and violence, um, the more a person is willing to express threats of violence, the less dangerous they are to anyone who has a modicum of a cool head, because
Yes.
they're easy to outmaneuver. And I'm not talking about outmaneuver and like do a Naruto dodge and chop them in the face. I'm talking about like, okay, cool, you broke my jaw, I'm now taking you to court for $25,000. Thanks, you just paid for my mortgage for 6 months, and I'll heal up. It's great, thanks, dude. Like weird kind of. I'm not talking about being a dick and creating certain problems, but what I am saying is that when you look at people who use force and use violence, they're not going to tell you about it. And so in our culture and in our community, like I grew up a lot in that military time where like you had to fight the other guy, and yeah, we did, and we became better friends because of it, because we were establishing rapport with one another. But that was the end goal. The end goal was not to just like some sort of supremacy. It was like to establish rapport. And so, but the people that I want to fight to actually do damage on, like, I'm not going to tell you, dude. I'm not going to get on Twitter and say, oh, fuck you, I'm going to kick your face in. It's like, you're just going to turn your car and it's going to light on fire. Like, I don't, that's not, that's how shit works. That's how shit works in like the world of violence, is that like the guy, and you see this in every arena of like, the ego and established dominance. It's like, yeah, you're very good at doing that. You will die. You're just straight to cannon fodder. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Whereas the people who are like, you look at this in special operations and the higher tiers, and you look at all these different worlds where like the really true good people at violence isolate, is they're not walking around freaking, oh, my chest is so big, look at my goddamn chest. They're making jokes with each other about it because it's funny. So that's kind of my soapbox right now. So I've been around in this. I've seen it. I don't know how to put it another way. Like I've seen a lot of interesting people in this world, and be careful about the people who you mistake their identity, because that's how you end up being killed.
Yeah.
I have
think that's
found
kind
that
of
the loudest and most boisterous and most outwardly violent people are usually the people who are capable of the least.
once you hit the Pareto distribution, you start spiking into true violence. Yeah, absolutely. Like they might be able to break your jaw in a car fight, but like they're so predictable, dude. Sorry, they might be able to break your jaw in like a boxing match, but they're so predictable. They're so easy to figure out.
And it's like getting back to like the anti-intellectualism in the gun world. Like again, that kind of persona of the guy who wears the shirt that's like all, fuck you, I have a gun, I'm gonna make the world however I see fit, versus the guy that is, well stocked, prepared, well versed in a variety of skill sets that are applicable to actually, if one needed to, fighting an insurgency against a tyrant, or whatever, or actually defending their community, or themselves on a more personal defense basis. Like the guy who's going to be real hot shit about concealed carry or whatever isn't going to be wearing a shirt that is like just obviously broadcasting how ready they are for violence, because they understand the first step to being safe is to not come across as a target, but also not broadcast what you're carrying and basically give away the game. Like you want to be avoiding situations in the first place.
Yeah, dude, like I have gun culture clothing. Like I have stuff that with artwork and pieces that are done that like if anyone knows anything, dude, like what am I wearing right now? I'm wearing black jeans, I'm wearing Vans, I'm wearing a black hoodie right now. Like if you know anything about gun culture, you're gonna be like, oh, look at that guy's like a goon dude, and you're gonna be like, yeah, you know what? I got nods on the couch over here. Like it's great, whatever, and so like I do like this is the aesthetic that I'm currently in right now, and I like it, and it is what it is. But sometimes you got to read the room, and that is a maturity that we can build in one another. Yes. It's sometimes you have positive reinforcement, sometimes you have negative reinforcement. Sometimes it's like, hey man, I got to tease you for this because you're not doing the right thing, and sometimes it's like, you just, hey man, like I don't want you to be wearing something and being uncomfortable in public and like awkward about it. I think that most of what people present for like hyper alertness is just masturbation. You're just like trying to project a sense of urgency where it's like, yeah, I don't tell the waitress if I want to sit with my back to the wall because I'll just sit down. I don't have to tell everybody in the I don't have to tell everybody in the restaurant that I'm a veteran and I've been like, I'm the guy in charge here. It's like, dude, here's a good story, right? So like I was on a flight coming back from Ukraine. I was on a flight coming back from Ukraine and this was early on in the invasion, very, very early. And I went over there with a company who called me and because of like reputation, people knew each other, and they were working a very simple gig. There was a number of families that had money and they needed to have their family members moved because they were worried about kidnapping and that kind of stuff. It's like, because Eastern Europe, you still have like the ghost of communism hanging over it, and people with wealth and achievement are afraid that other people are going to use the chaos of war to take advantage of their family. It sounds really cool, dude. I drove a grandmother to a safe house, okay? It's not like I'm like, oh, freaking just like right out with a crank and I'm fighting off the Russians. Like, dude, I drove, you know what I mean? Like, so it sounds cool. But I also went there as a bit of a journalist with like a camera to see what was going on. And there's a certain naivety that's very prevalent in America, and you see it in people, and it really makes you kind of sad. But it's a certain naivety of people were going over there and thinking they're going to go fight the Russians because they knew how to shoot an AK. And the people in Ukraine didn't have like a logistics chain. So they were ad hoc putting together like a war machine that was somewhat established because of various organizations, but also like as a whole, not really that solid. And so I'm in this airport. I think it was I don't remember which airport I was in anyway. But there was this guy walking around wearing blue jeans. He had like some really clean Ukrainian military jacket on. He had a bit of a gut. He had big like American military, like the brown leather boots that you see with army guys. Brown suede.
Thank you for my service boots.
Kind of, well, yeah. I mean, and like like the funny thing is like my brother-in-law, who is a Marine, still wears those because they're super comfy and he's broken them in, right? So like there's and everyone has their shtick, but like this was a costume this guy was wearing, right? And he still had like fresh blue tape on his arm from being in Ukraine. and like and I'm trying to dress casual, but because I wasn't good at it at the time. I'm not saying at the time. I was like wearing like a flannel and jeans and whatever, and so like I went up to this restaurant to order a coffee, and he heard that he heard my American English, and so like I go and sit down and I start reading because I was reading a book or writing in my journal or something, and he decided that he had to tell me everything about him and how he had come over there and he was organizing the civil defense force of blah 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 blah. And it was like it was really really sad because eventually like he got up to like he was on a plane that was leaving before me, and he got the crew together to lecture them about what was going on in the Eastern Front and all this kind of stuff. And it was like, I honestly felt bad for the guy because he had to get the attention of random strangers in an airport to validate the good that he was supposedly doing. And like if you're over there doing something good, I hope that you know that it is good because it is good if you're doing something that is good. But if you have to like acquire the applause of random strangers for your sense of importance, like that's a really tragic, and I want to encourage you to let that down a little bit and just go make friends.
That
Dude,
that
Because
sounds like he doesn't really have the self-actualization aspect down very much.
it was really odd, but it again goes back to that like American like over advertising thing. And like he pulled his shirt away and it had like a little Ranger tab on there, and I was like,
Oh
okay,
Lord.
great. And I was like, oh,
Christ.
fuck, it's just like
Dude, the amount of people who
so
have been killed in Ukraine for updates on the internet. Like,
yeah. I mean, it's yeah, like oh look where I'm at, like cool, I'm currently in Kiev. Oh, Kiev was hit by a rocket.
yeah, shit
Like
has happened.
I was there when I was there. Yeah, it's like okay. I'm not saying like get a burner phone. Just take small steps to protect yourself if you're going to do something. I don't believe that safety is the best outcome. I really think that safety is for the weak and the mediocre. But if you're going to be dangerous, you better be excellent. And safety is always maybe that's a worse way of saying it. Safety is a secondary value that comes after valor, and it comes after pursuing excellence. If I want to learn how to do anything that's dangerous and I want to learn how to do it well, my goal is not to be safe. My goal is to do the thing. So, like, if you're going to learn how to ride a motorcycle, learn how to drive a motorcycle well. Safety just might be the way you get there, but you're not trying to be safe. If you want to be safe on the road, go drive a Prius or something.
Hey,
Yay! Love it.
Nathan just plowed his Prius into concrete.
And it works.
Yeah.
Still, it's great.
It was
And it's
honestly
still
yeah.
riding around in
That's
the Prius in Vegas was a boss move. I'm sad we didn't get footage of us using it for
dude. I'm
a
sad we didn't
drive-by in the
get footage
desert.
of us doing a drive-by out of it. It
So I just
Ah.
said, motherfucker.
Yeah, no, 100%. We need to do more with that thing. I love that vehicle. That thing has literally driven as far as you can drive. Well, this is an exaggeration, but almost as far as you can drive across the continental United States. That car is a boss. I don't give a shit.
Awesome. Yeah, I know people talk shit about Priuses for a long time, but and myself included. And at the same time, having 55 miles to the gallon is kind of nice.
You're like,
Oh,
yes,
dude, I drove to
kind of
Scottsdale and
cool.
back, and all around Vegas. Shuttling everyone around for a week for less than $300.
That's not bad at all.
It's 32 hours of driving plus whatever we did in the city.
Yeah, that's a hell of a lot less than I spent on my my airplane ticket.
Yeah,
Yeah, right.
I'm surprised. Last year I did Vegas for very cheap. I thought I was under the
And you got
assumption,
gout.
and I got gout. This year was a lot healthier, much healthier.
Yeah.
Um,
This year was the same for me. I was much less heavy into the activities.
Yes.
That's probably good for the body and the mind.
yeah, I think the first
Yeah.
year you kind of have to go nuts, and then every year afterwards, it gets
Yeah.
lower
I mean,
and lower.
we were still up to 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning most nights, but
Oh no, I was not doing that. Not even my first. I was like 2 a.m. is my hard cutoff.
no,
Yeah.
we were. I think 3 out of the 4 nights. I think at least 3 times we went to bed at like 5 in the morning.
Oh
Yeah.
my god.
Yeah.
Hell no, dude.
So.
Well, shit, man.
Yeah. You sleep when you're dead.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
is true. This is true forever. But
Speaking
it's
of,
been
I think it is past PR's bedtime. I just realized.
Well, no, I was just looking at
Yeah.
the clock. We're at like 2.5 hours, man. This
yes,
has been a
sir.
really
Yes,
great
sir.
chat.
Yeah, really happy to have had you on for an art and war ramble. But
Yes,
I
I wanted
I
to
think
ask you more about your story, but at the same time, we can always do that in the next episode. Because you,
You know how to find me. You
yes,
know how to get a hold of me. I think I have been told that I am now at a place where it is okay for me to talk a little bit more about anything that I've done in life, because I was starting to try. When I was starting to try to do like the YouTube podcasting thing. It was at the tail end of where guys would just come out and say, "I was an X, so therefore listen to me," and so I was trying to be careful about that.
yeah, yeah.
But
No,
I think it'll be a good time.
yeah, you've built something without standing on what you've done previously, and I think there's a lot of value in that. And then just
I agree.
using your experiences to enhance what you've built, without making that the core reason to come and see what you do. I think there's a lot of value in that, and those are always the people I get the most value out of in this space, of people who don't stand on the shoulders of their career, but just
Yeah.
just build shit that's worthwhile. So yeah, thank you for
I
coming on, man.
appreciate that. That is a huge compliment. I mean, it really is. It's Thank you very much for saying that. That it cuts a lot deeper in a good way than I am able to express.
Yeah, of course, man. Well,
Mhm.
before we go,
Yes,
we
you
need
beat me to it.
we gotta get some dad advice from you for the listeners.
I am not yet a father, so
Not not all of our
I'm
guests
not
are, but speak to
Yeah.
them as if they are your sons.
Yes.
dad advice. Okay, it's not gonna come. It's gonna sound weird, but don't be afraid to read like heavy books that are outside of your level of reading. Also, don't be afraid to memorize cool shit. And so those are two things of like, if you are waiting for permission to do the thing that you think is right, no one is going to give you permission, and anyone who does, you won't respect anymore. So as the difference between being a child and being an adult is that a child asks for permission, and an adult makes plans to do what he thinks is the right thing to do. And so,
Incredibly
whether it's
based.
starting a business, holding a conversation, criticizing your friend for doing something stupid, like that is the key difference between a child and an adult as far as it comes to agency. And so, don't wait for permission, man. If you don't want to be a part of Goon culture and you want to create your own hype video, go create a hype video or do something. But yeah, if you let resentment rule you, I'll quickly put you on the block channel. I don't really care.
I like that. It's creating is far more enriching than tearing down, and I think that more
Yes.
Mhm.
people have to realize that.
Yeah, I mean, what's the like Benjamin Franklin? I'm listening and reading through David McCullough's 1776, and they were ordinary men just like us. So
Pretty
you
young
can.
dudes too.
They were, yep. So you can do it, man. Like the founding fathers are not myths left in history. They were men of their time. You are the man of your time. Tomorrow does not need to be worse than today. So keep
I
on,
like
carry on.
Hell yeah.
keep on keeping
Wunderbar.
on.
All
Mhm.
right.
Anyways, thank you for
All of,
coming on. Turn people on to Redacted Culture Cast. He's
yeah,
on
all of your
Spotify.
links
Okay.
will be in the all your links will be in the description. But for the people listening, where should they go
Yeah.
to find you?
Yes.
How do you find me? Okay, so on Instagram, it's at Redacted LLC. I do run a website called redactedllc.com. That's where you can find our store. You'll find some coded language and hidden elements in any of the stuff that we're producing. The other places you can find me, I am on, I am on X or Twitter now. I have to bring it up because I don't remember exactly what the handle is. Let's look at it right over here.
We'll put a link in regardless, so don't worry about looking it up.
So my Twitter is at Foxroe, Foxroe. So if you want to find me on Instagram, at Redacted LLC, and then on YouTube, it's the Redacted Culture Cast. But that's the same thing on Spotify, YouTube, Apple, Rumble, and you know how to find me there. And so that's it. That's who I am.
Hell yeah. All right. Thank you very much for joining us, man. It's been a pleasure. And I'm I'm sure.
It was good to have a really good conversation with you. It was nice meeting you at
agree.
SHOT Show. I'm glad we got to follow up. Thanks much.
Yeah.
We'll
Likewise,
do
man.
this again.
All right, guys.
Okay, bye.